Hi, guys, and welcome to the Gin and Tonic Show. I'm your host, Moose, and this is my producer, Nick. Our main discussion is about Islam in the 21st century. However, we will critique other religions and ideologies. We condemn any form of discrimination, violence, misogyny, slavery. We do, however, embrace many perspectives and free speech if it is factual and correct, and not based on any hate. Throughout the show, we will be exploring different religious beliefs, practices, and their impact on society, ranging from politics, interpersonal relationships, and mental health of believers and non believers. We hope to create an open dialogue for those who feel they're not heard, especially those who have doubts and have left their belief systems. If you are interested in exploring the complex topic of religion and wish to be part of an honest and open dialogue, this is the show for you. We also welcome feedback and discussion from our audience and listeners. The Gin and Tonic Show is a free speech platform where you can express your ideas without any fear of violence and repercussions or any consequences. Please do join our discussion in the live chat as well as the comments. Thank you for stopping by and enjoy the Gin and Tonic Show.
Hopefully, everyone can hear me. I am Satan, the devil worshipper, not to be mistaken with the other devil worshipper on this channel, Moose, who is away this week. But with the amount of racist jokes I sent him, he'll get canceled with his WhatsApp chats leak, and he can do gin and tonic full time. So, uh, I'm officially back. But probably some break next couple of weeks.
S
Hey, Jenny.
Hello.
Hey, Jenny.
Are you hello?
I
Are
can
you
hear
talking
you.
with Yeah,
Yeah, just starting the show here.
all right.
So, how was your week?
So and so.
Same here. I had to. The Canadian weather is fucking trash. I cleaned my driveway this morning, sweated like I was like being interviewed by the TSA, and then 2 hours later it starts snowing again in a snowstorm style. So I got to go back after this show and clean up my driveway, and I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ, I won't be able to stand up tomorrow. But yeah, for today's show, if you remember, I did my summary of my thesis presentation on financial crimes a while back when I was having COVID. But it turns out Moose is a bit busy today, so I thought I'd come in and run the show and give the
Yeah,
actual religious side of the presentation.
all right.
So when it, co-
I will mostly just be in the background and maybe comment at times
yeah,
and ask questions.
once in a while I'll like ask if there's any questions from the audience and such, just to be engaging. But this, as you, so my origin, this isn't my original thesis defense presentation. That was a 3 hour long discussion for me. This is more of like just a summarized version for gin and tonic here, where I
All right.
don't have like the court documents for the cases and such on here. But if there's a particular case that the audience likes, I'll go more into that section. So some of the crimes that I personally talked about in my presentation, or at least in this presentation here, is sexual abuse, financial fraud, discrimination, and hate crimes. child abuse and neglect, terrorism and extremism, and human trafficking. Um, we're not saying that religions must do this to qualify as a religion, but there's a lot of like actual religious organizations that have dipped
I
their
mean,
fingers
I'm not.
into this.
It's kind of like this. I mean, most religious organizations and most members of them do not commit these things. It is, after all, a minority that does these sort of things. But
Yeah,
I mean, it's still an issue when an organization becomes corrupted or you have corrupt elements within an organization that does these sort of things. I would also only highlight that I think that discrimination and hate crimes, together with terrorism and extremism, are quite different from a lot of these other crimes here as well, as you could connect them more directly to certain traditions within religions. Of course, other things can be connected to certain religious traditions as well, that, for example, promote child marriage and the like. But, mostly, I would say that you can commit discrimination and hate crimes as well as terrorism and extremism and not do it out of corrupt motives, even if it is illegal to do so. It's not the same as in financial fraud, sexual abuse, human trafficking, and things like that. I do think that there are differences here between these various crimes and the reasons behind them that can be important to highlight.
exactly. And it's one of the reasons why previously in this presentation I discussed a lot more about cults because, for example, something like child abuse, financial fraud, and human trafficking, those would more be in a cult-based organization that use religion as a front, kind of like the mafia using a laundromat as a front. Whereas you can directly go into various faiths and read specific verses that directly discriminate against certain groups. For example, with the children of Ham being sent off to Africa being the common interpretation for biblical slavery for the longest of times.
Yeah, the
That
curse of
slave
Ham,
trade.
the various passages is against various sexual practices, and you have the cause for violence in all of the Abrahamic faiths against the polytheists and the non-believers.
For sure. So
But I still think that if you do acts of terror or discrimination and the like due to those things, I do still think that that is quite different from using religion as a source for example for financial gain by doing fraud. I think there is a difference here.
there definitely is an difference because we discussed previously as well, there's certain verses that directly encourage discrimination and hate crimes and terrorism or extremism, but then when you want to commit tax fraud or something like that as a charity or a religious charity, it's a lot harder to get into your books and get behind that chastity belt of a religious charitable organization and audit you properly than a regular financial organization. So so when I put the overview of the crimes here, some are because of some are because of that religious veil we can't go and investigate, but then others are directly promoted in their books.
You have a difference in Canada between religious charities and non-religious charities in terms of how open they are with the bookkeeping.
So in terms of, it's not in Canada. So Canada, it's pretty similar, but when it comes to the states, there's a huge difference on that kind of charity, and even
All
in
right.
India.
Then,
Yeah,
sorry, since I'm Swedish, and you are from
Canada.
Canada, and it was not certain if you were speaking about the United States or Canada or just generally. because
Yeah,
in
so the
Sweden
cases
it's
I
more or
look
less
in,
it's more or less the same thing between a secular and non and a religious charity. Since they are both charity organizations, they go under the same, financial regulations, and they have to be pretty open with their bookkeeping
yes,
here in
so
Sweden.
when it comes to so the cases I got are pretty international, but then the specific laws that I was looking into was more American and Canadian laws. So, for example, the sexual abuse cases, the Catholic Church sexual abuse scandals. So there was an article, so there was an article that was released in 2001, and it was basically the Boston Globe's spotlight investigation team that had a lot of cover-ups unveiled, and they even made a movie about it. And this showed so let me just search up the exact number of priests that were. Uh, um,
I also want to voice something from
for sure,
personal experience regarding the Catholic Church and being active in their youth organizations. All right, before I became an
for sure.
atheist, I would say that I never experienced any sexual abuse, and I had a very good time there. I remember. So it's not like this is something that occurs normally. These are still the exceptions, I would say.
Definitely.
I
Yeah,
mean,
no, I
it's
definitely.
also we also need to remember, if I'm not entirely wrong, the Catholic Church has over 1 million people actually in their organization, and it's natural when you become that big that you will have a lot of rotten apples. This is not me saying that Catholicism is guiltless or it's a religion that is innocent or promoting Catholicism. It's just in order to put it in perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Because like it's always something that I say that there are a lot of Christian-based NGOs and churches that do a lot of good work for, let's say, the homeless here in Toronto. There's a couple of churches that do feed a lot of people on their own dime and such. So I'm not taking that away from them. But when the Boston Globe had 249 criminal cases come out in that one article for
Yeah,
the research that they did by 5 priests alone, you know there's an issue
yeah,
going on. So it's something that I always like to bring up for that reason because it's with sexual abuse cases, there's a lot of quid pro quo that happens because no one's going to like put up a video camera to film this kind of crime, right? It's not like a murder where there's a lot of clues or something. If they manhandled you sexually, they're not going to have a lot of evidence. Like there's no fingerprints, there's no bloodstains or whatnot. So
no,
it's a lot harder to prove. But when they had 249 cases from 5 Roman Catholic priests, it it's shocking. So then in Ireland in 2005, the Fens report revealed an extensive child abuse by children by Catholic priests in the descendants of Ferns in Ireland. And the report detailed numerous cases of abuse spanning over several decades, leading to public outrage and calls for accountability. And then a similar thing happened in Australia in 2017. And I remember this one particularly because I had a friend in Australia trying to investigate it, and a lot of times there he was telling me about the rampant corruption that they were trying to file to get out of these scams. So it's kind of a scary thing.
yeah,
So this is something that I'm familiar with in as well because of people I know who are in the medical field. the Jehovah's Witness child abuse controversy. So there was a case for Candace Conti in 2012, which garnered significant attention, and she actually sued the Watchtower um, Bible and Tract Society in New York, and alleged that they failed to protect her from sexual abuse members in the congregation. So, and then in Canada, there was a 2018 Supreme Court of Canada ruling for Jehovah's Witnesses that um, who also had sexual abuse issues as well. But for me, there's a lot of child abuse from Jehovah's Witnesses in terms of medical treatment as well, where they deny their children apt medical treatment for curable disorders and diseases due to blood transfusions being considered cannibalism in their faith. And the
I
relative is
mean,
in, yeah. Jenny, you were saying something?
yeah, I mean, still, that last type of abuse, which I agree is a sort of abuse, is still not the same as the sexual abuse stuff, because the thing about not taking, in blood or taking anything, certain medicines or products based upon blood, human blood, is has to do with their religious interpretation and about how they think you are going to, be punished by God for doing that. So it does have, there is, from a moral standpoint, I don't think it's as bad as sexual abuse, for example, because
If it was,
here you
if
actually,
they signed for me personally, if they signed a DNR for themselves saying, if I get into a trauma situation and or I get cancer or whatnot and it requires a blood transfusion and I won't go to heaven, I'll die a martyr. If they sign that legal document away and they can consent, then I think it's up to them, and I'm totally for that situation. I'll kill them.
yes,
This is just a joke, people, but Canada has legalized euthanization for this exact reason.
yeah,
But there's a reason why you can't sign a mortgage in your child's name. Same way you can't do the same kind of contract on your child's name for that exact reason. They can't consent to this the way that you are consenting. Would
yes,
that be
but
an apt comparison there, Jenny?
no, I wouldn't go as far as, comparing it to euthanasia or, suicide help or something like that. I would still say, though, that there is a difference in hurting your child due to good intentions, even if those intentions are based upon bad premises and the like, and actually abusing your child due to, various nefarious intentions, like abusing your child and sexually, for example. There is still a difference here that where I it's not that I defend, Jehovah's Witness in the other case. It's just that I think that we need to have discuss some of the degrees here in issue, in the level of problematic that exist here. Do I make any sense, Satan?
Yeah, I definitely understand where you're coming from on that, but it's right for me. Like because I had the personal experience from the family as well, where it's more so that they don't think it also comes from a selfish place for many of them as well. It's not about the child there; it's about we won't go to heaven, not the child won't go to heaven. So
Yes, but I would still argue that it's kind of different. It's just that I like to categorize things in various defined boxes when I discuss these issues, because otherwise you begin to mess things up by, mixing things that end up in absurdities later.
definitely, so I have a couple of other cases as well for this topic, and and it gets into a bit of a lighter mood of other crimes like discrimination. But for the next case in the independent Baptist churches, and they're the usual ones that like stand outside abortion clinics and such. In the 2012 case, a former pastor was convicted of taking minors across state lines with the intention of engaging in sexual activity, and he was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. And I remember this case particularly where the church tried helping him out by paying for his lawyers, even though he was caught red-handed for it. And it particularly raised issues in terms of how the church was handling it and why it wasn't punishing the guy when they found him doing so on church premises. And a second one was Willow Creek Community Church in Illinois, and they had a similar case in 2018 where Bill Hybels was found guilty recently for um, sexually abusing multiple women. So, anything you want to add here, Culture Jenny?
Regarding the lawyer, I mean, it depends very much upon the context here, and I feel that, I mean, caught red-handed, sure, but it also depends how it was presented to the people there, because you can have a standard if you work for this company, for example, or this organization, and you get into legal trouble, then by you having worked for this organization, we will hire a lawyer for you as kind of a benefit of working there. So those things exist too. And that might be involved here in that it was more of a standard thing of they will hire a lawyer whenever you get into legal trouble.
Yeah, in this particular case, it did raise a lot of questions in terms of why they were defending, but it's Moose would have loved to discuss this, and it's a case I think we will be doing in further detail when he's around, especially considering his legal background. The next is financial fraud cases. So with financial fraud, essentially, we did an entire episode on this. So I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but any fraud is deception or intent of deception in selling or thieving a certain product, and a lot of these guys are guilty of that in a financial sense. So televangelist Robert Tilton faced scrutiny when it was revealed that prayer requests were sent to his ministry were sorted and financial offerings were removed, and then the remaining letters were discarded, and that counted as frauds because he was told that the money was being used for prayers and seed faith for the people that were sending in money, and a lot of people who had like cancer or other deadly diseases or huge amount of loans were still sending him money for the seed faith to grow and prosper and bring fruit, as he described it. And I think he was also one of the guys that tried buying a private jet using that money. Then you got Peter Popoff, same uh, thing. He was a televangelist, and he claimed to have special knowledge about his audience, and he received through divine revelations, and he tried doing some faith healing stuff as well. He also had one of those like earpieces that you put in, and then they would be telling him information about particular people from the background, so it wasn't actually like God giving him information there. And it's already a given. A lot of these guys also have tax fraud or tax laws and violations of that. But in 2007, Benny Hinn was caught by the Senate Finance Committee for tax laws. And one of the ways people actually find tax laws is exuberant spending outside of salary. Uh, and if you have a good lawyer, you can get away with criminal charges or closed cases after a plea deal, especially if you have enough money. But in cases like these, they can put your books out for the public to see, and apparently he was sitting on money or piles of cash, quite literally, from all the sea faith money he was getting in. And a lot of religious-based organizations, especially in... So, quick question here. Many play on people's beliefs in the why. Well, belief and faiths both things of no proof. Yeah, exactly. Religion, it bring that blind belief brings a lot of people peace, but it can also be a way to scam them. So Ponzi schemes and investment fraud. So a lot of MLMs and Ponzi schemes just being there's a product that's not there, but they sell as if it's actually there, and you end up losing the money for it. And there's a lot of faith-based business opportunities for actual products that are supposed to be there but not actually there. And these are 3 cases. But there's a lot of these in India itself where there are certain cases of Sai Baba and other fake gurus trying to sell certain BS. For example, there was an issue with certain Babas finding real estate deals and trying to get various people's money for seed faith, but then, or the Hindu version of it, and then investing into real estate development projects and not giving those people the share back. So this kind of financial frauds do exist all over the world, but the thing is, because they're done in private, even if you write reports on them, they bribe the right people to not have the cases pursued. And then you got embezzlement, where you, for example, like to explain embezzlement, let's say you're a law firm. Your law firm charges $500 an hour, and then they pay you $300, keeping $200 for operational costs. You charge your client $500, but you don't put it on the books of the law firm. So you work 10 hours, you're supposed to get $5,000, but you don't actually write down in the company books that you work 10 hours for so and so client. You pocket the $5,000 for yourself. That's embezzlement because you stole the cut of $200 from your law firm directly. That's what happens here when they get charity goods for certain activities. For the churches, they get donations for certain activities, but they're overbilled and used for different things, for private, personal things. And you have a couple of cases, but in churches, that this is actually more exuberant because with charities, the way that they have to pay taxes and such is a lot more different, so it's a lot easier to embezzle as opposed to if you have a private business or you're a law firm or you're an engineering firm. And it's the same thing with like so a lot of charities do good actual charitable work. Example, in downtown Toronto, we have a couple of churches that actually feed a lot of homeless people that have increased in the last couple of years here. So, and then they also help with safe injection sites. So it's a really helpful place. But then there are a lot of people who use the funds for dubious activities. For example, the Holy Land Foundation for Relief and Development in 2008 was the largest Muslim charity in the United States, and it was shut down because its leaders were sending funds to Hamas, which is still designated as a terrorist organization. And they were and they were basically raising the question about why certain charitable funds were being raised in a religious context. So, Culture Jenny, do you have anything so far?
I mean, I would say that a lot of this has to do with the fact that it's, I mean, many of these organizations, you do not have good oversight over them if they are religious, because they are under various laws which makes it which do not force the same openness if you, for example, work in a company or in certain other organizations which have to have clearer bookkeeping and clearer views of the money flows due to various reasons, either due to you being forced to have clear bookkeeping because you have investors and people that need to get the money in the end, or you have various regulatory laws that force you to be more open with your bookkeeping. But religious organizations and certain other organizations that are similar in not being open with their bookkeeping, it's much more easier there to do embezzlement, since it's not that easy to find out about it when you look into their stuff, as they don't have clear bookkeeping where you can trace money disappearing.
Exactly, and there was a case that Moose covered last show as well about her. It was halal mortgages that where the guys claimed Islamophobia because we filed a case on them for embezzling money in America. So it's there's a having that religious veil in front of you will hide a lot of the stuff that you do in the back end.
You haven't told me about this. It sounds interesting.
Oh yeah, there was this. So there was a show in the last week or so, or before that. There was this guy in Dearborn that did halal mortgages, where so for a mortgage, what happens is the bank. No one has a Toronto house costs $1 million. No one has $1 million in cash. The maximum they can do is open a line of credit or whatever, or have 5% or 10% or 20%. So up to $200,000 that they can put up as equity for the house. And then the remaining 80%, the bank will give them at an interest rate of, I believe the current Canadian rate is 6.5% interest on that. Now, interest is haram. You cannot have interest. So, in a normal mortgage, by the end of the term, 15 or 30 years mortgage, you end up paying, instead of the $800 that you owe, you're essentially paying them the full $1 million with that interest going on monthly. This halal mortgage won't give you the $800 for 6%, but they'll give you $950 for 0% interest. Because they have a veil of the religious thing before. Um, there was a guy in America who was caught for doing embezzlement on some of these loans, and he was actually reported to Better Business Bureau in the States, and the I keep forgetting SEC for misfiling certain receipts and such especially because like in mortgage securities is a highly regulated field, especially after 2008. And when they filed a case on him, he essentially cried Islamophobia in court, saying that the Western banks are against halal mortgages and they're trying to beat the competition.
Yeah, but you said you were involved in this. Did Moose file a complaint or something?
Oh no, I have a mortgage license in the States. I kind of got drunk one day and wrote the test. So I'm
All right.
technically licensed to provide mortgage loans. So this was like a journalistic piece that I specifically wrote back in the day in
All
college
right.
after I got my license. Yeah, so that's the reason why I knew and provided the case to Moose to study. But I didn't want to like put out my like address or article because of my like doxing situation.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah.
It's the same reason as to why I call myself the culture genie on YouTube and do not make videos under my own name, because I don't want to, be doxing myself, because there
Yeah,
is a lot of people out there in the world that are quite crazy and can track you down for stuff
yeah,
if you're too open.
yeah. Only Moose knows my real name, and he won't show it. But yeah, even Nick or whatever I use on the screen, it's all fake names. It's all fake, like CNN. But yeah, discrimination and hate crime. Some of these are why I actually changed out of religion in the first place. The Gujarat riots being the main reason, which primarily continued in hate crimes under Modi's rule in India for a long time. Now he's done a lot of good for the country. For example, his currency scheme and then Swachh Bharat, I think are really good plans. But then there's other activities where he lit a train full of. I think the passengers are 75% Muslim, and he lit the train on. Or he personally didn't do it, but he stayed silent during that riot there when they lit that train on fire.
Yeah, oh god, yeah,
Yeah,
I've heard about that incident. Ugh. I'm not a
yeah,
fan of Moody, but I can still see why certain people support him from what I've seen as well. It's I since I'm not an expert on Indian politics and just look and I've just looked into it very briefly, I will not go into this subject as I do not feel I have enough of a good grounding in it to discuss it.
yeah. Like I mentioned, like one thing that I don't like is that he's seen almost like a religious figure leader, where you're not allowed to criticize him on any front. Where the Maldives, for example, some people in the Maldives, the ministers, I think, were talking trash, basically saying that Modi smelled like trash, like the streets of India or something. And now there's a huge boycott Maldives thing going on, where they say don't go to the Maldives for vacation. And I'm like, so you're going to destroy the economy of an entire country because some idiot MP decided to call your political leader a trash can. Like, what did all those innocent business owners do? You're going to hit them right in their stomachs and make sure they can never eat another grain of rice for the rest of their life just because some dude said some words? Are you like that? Moose can come on here and call me all kinds of racial slurs, and I won't say anything to him because it's getting offended is my choice. But I at no point would if I had any issue with that, I would go after Moose directly. I wouldn't go after his family or the innocent people that he's supporting. Same way with the Maldives. Why is the government trying to boycott innocent business owners rather than trying to sanction the MPs themselves if blasphemy laws were put in the
I
first
mean, this
place?
happen a lot with yeah. I mean, this happens a lot with misplaced nationalism and patriotic pride and things regarding that nature, and it seems very hyper charged in India right now.
Exactly. There's this one guy I particularly remember in Telugu. He made this movie called Kartikeya 2. The first one was really good, but the second one was it was shit right from the anus, and it was not good whatsoever. And we might even react to that, the Hindi or English version of it. But that actor, he was like talking smack in an interview where basically he was saying the worst thing that can happen to this country is secularism because we'd lose our Hindu identity. We're a Hindu country and we got to be a strong Hindu force for the entire country. And I'm like, Jesus, what the hell is this guy saying?
I mean,
Yeah,
Hinduism isn't even one religion. It's kind of like a name given to a hodgepodge of several local traditions,
I
which some of
w-
them have barely anything in common.
I would actually say, like, for him, like the main point of contention I have with what he said is secularism isn't opposed to a certain religion. It just doesn't want laws being made on a religious front. So if he's saying that he doesn't want secularism, he wants a pure Hindu Rashtra, he's going to be okay with implying all religious laws, no matter how bad they are. For example, sati or
I mean, several of the Hindu traditions do have this concept about dharma and ar, afra, artha,
adharma.
yeah, dharma and about the religious ritual duties, and then you have ar, arthra, the worldly duties and rules regarding that, isn't it? So, if I'm not
Yeah, they have the similar. So I know the terms in Telugu, not in Sanskrit. So it's dharma and samsara. In Telugu, it's samsara is used for both your family life and societal life, but I don't know that distinction or separatism in
I think
Sanskrit.
Arthra or Ardha, which I don't know how it's pronounced in Sanskrit since I haven't learned Sanskrit, is about the worldly duties
Artha.
related to the religious, like economical duties and the duties of certain rules regarding certain Hindu traditions.
Yeah. So
Hindu has Hinduism got a primary whole book like Christianity has the Bible, Islam has the Quran? Well, you do have the Veda scriptures, but you do not actually have a primary holy book. You just have several religious traditions that have several different religious books, teachings, and traditions.
if you had
Hinduism is a,
to come with one, it would probably be the Rig Veda, but it comes from the Vedas were actually formed from intermediate tribal stories from villages. And when I say tribal stories, Hindutva folks, don't get mad at me. I know that you guys like using tribal or Koiwalu as a racial slur, but the original word is not a racial slur. If you live in a village in the forest, by definition, in your own goddamn constitution, you're a tribal person. It's not a racial
I've
slur; it's an actual word.
the Vedas are actually pretty cool scripture though.
Yeah.
I've only looked into translations of them. Again, I am not able to read or write Sanskrit, and but it's interesting. And when you read this translation, and I had one with a lot of notes regarding similarities to Roman and Greek mythology and Norse mythology, and it's very interesting to
Yeah, it's
just
a very
see.
interesting read because like I grew up, so I studied the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas to the point where I have the Vedas. So I have certain portions of the Vedas. So I used to be able to recite the Bhagavad Gita completely, but I've that got pissed out of my memory right now. But some pujas and Vedas I actually have memorized to this day in Sanskrit. Gananam Tva Ganapati. So I can do the recitations for prayers and such. But I never actually sat through the class to get those translated, so I have no idea what they mean. I just know how to say them because
All
Sanskrit may be
right.
yeah, the Sanskrit is a written it has writings later on, but it was originally developed as an oral language. So you're taught to memorize these before they actually teach you what the translation is for you. So the fact that you got the English translations is a really good thing, and they're really hard to find nowadays. I can't find them. Culture Jenny, you were saying something.
Yes. I mean, it's kind of like it's kind of similar in how Muslims that are not of an Arabic background or Arabs that aren't able to read and write actually, just recite the Quran really without actually understanding the classical language they're in. It's similar in that regard.
Yeah. I think it's my fault as well. I should have like sat through those classes instead of like going to soccer practice. But
I mean, personally, or if we go back to Hinduism, personally, I find Hinduism to be sure not as fascinating as Islam, since my real interest is in Islam, but it's kind of like it's a, when I did study Hinduism as part of my general study of religion, it's it was the best most interesting aspect of studying various Hindu traditions was to study the comparative religious aspect and linking it back to other Indo-European religious traditions and showing just how similar they actually were in many regards. The entire idea of cyclical thinking, which is a very strong pattern in Indo-European religion, the idea of a kind of like of reincarnation and of reoccurrence of spirit being a very strong pattern in various Indo-European traditions, hierarchical caste ideas. I mean, castus comes from Latin originally and later got applied to Hinduism.
it was originally called the Varna.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's fascinating stuff, really, because Hinduism is the last surviving, and then you also have the branching of Buddhism from that. But still, Hinduism and Buddhism later is this last surviving branch of Indo-European polytheistic religious traditions.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, and I might do an episode on that. Might invite Jen on it. Might it's a really fun topic to actually cover, even because I have a healthy respect for it, but I don't have this advert nationality that comes with some people that follow it. So I'd like to make a neutral presentation on Hinduism one day for Gin and Tonic. But in any case,
Yeah,
yeah.
kind of like how I do my presentations about various subjects regarding Islam, and I try to stay very neutral and just objectively describe it.
Yeah, it's religion's a fun topic. We can, especially like those stories, I can go on and on about them. But I think we can. I should get back to this presentation here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. We went off the rails. Sorry, I'm sorry
No
for
worries, it's my
causing
fault.
that.
I went off the rails first. But Asia Bibi in Pakistan, she was a Christian woman who was sentenced to death for blasphemy after a dispute with a Muslim coworker. Her case drew international attention and was highlighted the misuse of blasphemy laws to discriminate against religious minorities in Pakistan. There was also the Sri Lankan worker in Pakistan who got attacked recently. Then the 2017 Rohingya crisis in Myanmar, and it was involved the widespread violence and displacement against the Rohingya Muslim minority. Thousands were killed. Hundreds of thousands were forced to flee their homes. Human rights organizations and international community condemned Myanmar militaries for ethnic cleansing and religious persecution. And this also happened to Uyghurs in the exact same front. So remember, folks, I'm not criticizing just Islam here. I'm criticizing everyone. You're not racist if you hate every race.
Yeah, we hate everyone equally here. Nah, we try to avoid hatred, but we try to be balanced.
We try to be neutral in terms of we bring we try to talk about the positives in terms of the history like I did in multiple presentations, but there's also problems. You can't put blinders on and only talk about the positives. There's also issues that need to be brought up. So
Yeah,
this is the discrimination and hate crimes for LGBTQIA individuals. And I think Moose has mentioned it on the show, but he is one of those people. And this is something that's close to his heart, where there are people being persecuted from multiple religions on this matter. For example, the murder of David Kato, who was a Ugandan LGBTQ plus rights activist. And he was brutally murdered after his photo was published on local newspapers saying hang them. And in Uganda, homosexuality is still criminalized. So even wearing stuff like earrings and such as a man, you'll get punished there. Chechnya has an anti-LGBTQ plus purge. So there was a government-led campaign in Chechnya to detain, torture, and kill LGBTQ individuals. And this purge was targeting individuals based off their perceived sexual orientation without the confirmation. And then the Pulse nightclub shooting in the United States. There was a guarded there was a gunman that actually walked in and killed 49 people, and he claimed allegiance to ISIS as he was shooting them. So, any comments about this, Ginny?
Well, it's quite a diverse. I mean, these are quite diverse cases from a lot of different backgrounds and in different places, but they do share the same common thread of being inspired by religious ideology in various ways.
Exactly. It's hate comes from everywhere, so we got to attack them from multiple fronts there. So, violence against apostates and heretics. Oh boy, this is fun. So Sina Deghan is an Iranian man who was sentenced for death for apostasy after he was accused of insulting Prophet Muhammad, and his case shed light to a harsh penalty apostates face in countries with stricter interpretations of Sharia law. Now, what's the difference between Sharia law and Islamic law? I assume they're the same thing, just Sharia being a Arabic translation there.
I mean, there is kind of like a difference in, Arabic about Sharia as being kind of like the idealized law as it should be, and fiqh jurisprudence being the interpretation of it. So they do kind of like it's Islamic law is a very broad term here. And you also have the fact that Sharia includes more than just law per se, and fiqh interpretations as well. It's also a lot about how you behave generally that isn't concerned with a court, for example. It's like the Sharia is literally the most important way if you were to translate it, and fiqh is understanding. So it's understanding of the most important way, which is, if you want to kind of simplify it. And so I wouldn't say that there exists a direct translation of Islamic law or, saying that into Arabic, but, you could use the term al-Qanun al-Islami, but that would be very a mouthful, and it wouldn't be as precise to say what you meant. Either you use fiqh for the jurisprudence, or you use Sharia as the kind of like idealized goal of the law, the idealized way.
Yeah. The next case, this one is particularly interesting to me. It was Mashal Khan, a Pakistani university student who was lynched by a mob on his campus following accusations of blasphemy. The incident highlighted the dangers faced by those accused of blasphemy in Pakistan, where accusations can lead to violence and vigilantism. And please note here that it's accusations of blasphemy and not yet convicted of blasphemy. So, what do you say about this, Jenny? Um,
I mean, again, Pakistan is one of those areas where I think that you do say a lot that I mean, it is connected with ideas about blasphemy being forbidden in Islam, but I would say that this has also a lot to do with Pakistani culture generally, because I and Moose did a discussion in a gin and tonic shows. I don't know, but it was probably half a year ago, or something like that, where we discussed the difference between Pakistan and the Arab world, where we got into actually into the case that how the Arabs deal with, for example, someone saying blasphemy is quite different from how Pakistanis deal with it generally, due to various factors of how the honor culture and how the clan structure of the society works there. Sure,
yeah,
you do
and
have murders due to people going against Islam, but it's not in the same way as happens in Pakistan.
yeah, I remember this particular case. It was the Sri Lankan fellow, right, Dudabites? Yeah, yeah, it's vigilantism violence happens a lot in that area of the world, India and Pakistan. I have a couple of cases that I personally researched for a story I'm writing, but yeah,
I I I, I wonder if it has to do with the fact that you never developed the same kind of you know tradition of a strong overwhelming empire as you have seen in, for example, the Middle East, with many larger political states there. India was always divided, except when they during brief period like the Mughals, and then during the British, under several very splintered polities, always fighting against each other, disappearing, and reappearing, or splitting up into new entities. So you never had the kind of like tradition of a very strong, firm structure around society, which upheld a strict, constant law. I mean, even when you did have shifts in the Middle East, with, for example, shifting empires coming and going, you still had at least this local traditions of law still being in place. With, for example, the Shafi'i traditions coming from the Abbasid period until the Ottoman times in Egypt, being a strong tradition there, and in Syria, for
yeah,
example.
and this kind of like territorial kind of thing existed until partition, or I believe it's Wat Watchbai in India that actually hired like brought all the princely states to a solid India, Hyderabad being the last one.
I meant that the legacy of that might
Yeah,
still exist in a certain ways in the
yeah,
culture of both India and Pakistan.
yeah. It
In that,
definitely does in a lot of senses as well. So gender discrimination, and I know people in Saudi Arabia are still mad at this, but women started driving there in 2018. Ooh, culture, Ginny, look at all the rights they got. They're allowed to drive now. Uh, Malala Yousafzai in Pakistan. She's a Pakistani activist for female education, was targeted and shot by the Taliban for her advocacy, and her attack underscored the challenges faced by girls to seek education in regions with the strict interpretations of the religious belief. And then the triple talaq, which India actually got rid of, which is I think is a good thing. It's a instant divorce known as the triple talaq. In certain Islamic communities, the man is allowed to divorce one of his four wives by uttering the word talaq three times, almost like saying boogeyman three times or Beetlejuice three times. Countries, including India, have banned this practice, addressing gender discrimination within specific religious contexts. Do you have anything to say on this, Jenny, as well?
Yeah. I would say that, I mean, it's up to India to decide their laws and, what they should do there. But, I, I hope that the, reason that they did these kind of laws was to do with actually having some sort of ideology of greater equality and limiting gender discrimination, and not due to some sort of reason of actually, messing with the Islamic community there from the Hindu side.
You can't tell with the BJP, but I hope it's a move forward is for a good move forward. So, corporal punishment in religious schools for child abuse and neglect. So, there's a case for Islamic school abuse in UK. In the UK, and a teacher at an Islamic school was guilty of assaulting students, including hitting them with a stick. The abuse came to light when a whistleblower reported the incident, and I saw the footage of this. And that stick beating was something I received as well in certain religious institutions that I attended. So I know it's a common practice. There was a Christian boarding school abuse in the US. Students of the Circle of Hope Girls Ranch, a Christian on boarding school in Missouri, reported physical abuse, isolation, and neglect. Investigations revealed instances of severe corporal punishment, leading to the closure of the facility and legal action against the staff. Islamic school abuse in Pakistan. In Pakistan, a video surfaced showing a clerk physically abusing a child at the religious school, and the incident sparked an outrage and protests, which highlighted the safety of certain of at certain religious educational institutions. Like I mentioned, I too got beat at these religious schools growing up, so I definitely know that it's a very common practice. And the next one is the Christian school abuse in Australia. So several former students at a Christian school in Australia. Let me just get rid of this. Um, Here. They were basically physically abused with harsh discipline by staff members. The revelations led to a public outcry and investigations into school practice. Now, a common phrase that our parents actually said to the school when they caught me, particularly, is if I want my son to learn by being beat, I would have done that at home. It's not like I can't do that. I send him to the school because the teachers teach people with different kinds of learning abilities in a more fun manner. So if the school's not able to do that, then they're failing as their training as a teacher. Um, so I think like any school that lays hands on a child to teach them, I think is failing at their job and should be seriously punished and should no longer be teachers.
In this, I agree. Pain is not a good teaching instrument.
Yeah, it's Because like for me, I legitimately had ADHD, and then in the dyslexia and ADHD, right? So it's not that I didn't want to learn; it's that I needed someone to teach me in a certain way. Because if you're gonna, like they did in this school, if they're gonna be giving me a book in a language that I just learned how to read and write, I could barely read and write in English at that point, let alone in Telugu. And when they gave me the book and they're like, read the book, and I'm like, no, I'm not reading the book. I can't read the book. And they start beating me with a bamboo stick. It's like, yeah, no matter, you can stab me with a scalpel or a knife or a machete. I still can't, I can barely read English. What do you want from me? And knowing how mental health is taken in South Asia, I can tell you a lot of I can, there are studies that show that almost 10% of kids who were beat like this actually had higher rates of ADHD and dyslexia that need a specific kind of educational plan to actually get them. Because it's not that I knew the stuff. If you asked me orally, I could explain it. Same way with 10% of the population for the kids. But when they were forced to write and read that instead of giving it orally, it kind of was a detriment to their education there.
Right.
Yeah, do you have anything to say on that before we move along?
I mean, no, I don't have much to add. Much more than that. You aren't going to learn something fast because you add pain to it. You're just going to get distracted from actually learning, because now you're now your mind is going to be in confusion and be completely addled due to fear when you try to learn. So it it isn't very good. It isn't conducive for good learning to use physical punishment.
Yeah.
And I would say that I actually had a pretty classical upbringing and classical education, but I was never, beaten by my teachers when I got taught. I got taught in a kind of like special way due to various reasons when I was young, with a bit of homeschooling and such, by teachers coming to home due to various reasons. And I never, got beaten, but I did, learn a lot of these classical education, where you read a lot of, classical works and such stuff, because it was, part of my education. And, it was always, the teachers were very demanding. You had to read these things and such, but you were never beaten. You were just if you didn't do it, you were forced to do it anyway, because they would sit down and force you to read it, and you wouldn't be leaving the room until you did it.
Yeah, for me, the
You
first
would,
person that actually I had something similar where it was a reading kind of thing, but it was also we had a couple of teachers who would, if you didn't read, instead of yelling at you, they would beat you, like they would hit you right on the shin, not
I
on the calf side, but on the shin side where the bone is, with small bamboo sticks. And for those of you who don't know how that feels, it hurts because it's almost being like whipped but with something harder than a whip, right? So it leaves scars all over your shin. And the person who actually stood up for me was my soccer coach. He was like, if you're, he went up to that math teacher and was like, if you keep on beating the guy, how the fuck is he going to play in my games? He's like, make him pick up like a gun and like, or your stick and run around the school a couple of times if you want to punish him. But like, why the hell are you like hitting his legs when you know he has a soccer game next week? Oh, sorry, Jenny, I cut you off, I think.
no, it's
Yeah.
no biggie. It's just like, again, I mean, the best way to make actually someone interested, or rather make them study, is to make the subject matter interesting. If you can't make it interesting, then make the alternative less interesting. Like, instead of physically beating someone, lock them up and say, you won't be exiting this room, this very boring room, until you have actually finished the studying there. That that gives a lot of motivation.
Yeah, it's there's a I'm not a teacher, so I'll probably like not give out information on how to teach. I'll let the teacher professionals do that. But the next topic on child abuse and neglect is actually faith healing and medical neglect.
All
So
right. Yeah.
yeah, so there's numerous cases in the United States that involve children from religious families who died due to untreated medical conditions. Parents relying solely on faith healing, not choosing not to seek medical help, resulting in preventable deaths. The cases often led to legal battles surrounding parental rights and child welfare. Jehovah Witnesses and blood transfusions. Multiple legal cases where Jehovah's Witnesses refused blood transfusions for their children, leading to life-threatening situations. Courts have intervened in some cases, authorizing medical treatment against parents wishing to save their child's life. This was an incident that her family relative had. She had a issue where a kid had a fracture on. So it was one of those really bad fractures where the tibia split open and pierced out of the skin, and it was in the risk of getting infected. So they had to surgically put it back in place with a metal brace inside the leg. But because it required blood, they didn't like that option. But because of the severity of the infection that might come up on it, surgically was 99% recommended. And my relative had to essentially go to hire a lawyer to defend herself in this case for helping that child out for a simple 3-hour brace surgery, which essentially saved his life. The next case being faith healing deaths in the UK. In the UK, a couple was convicted of manslaughter after their baby son died from rickets due to lack of proper nutrition. The parents who followed a strict faith-based diet were found guilty of neglecting the children's health, promoting discussion about balanced religious freedoms and parental responsibility. And then the last one, a couple faced criminal charges for their daughter who died from bacterial meningitis. The parents opted for faith healing and prayer instead of seeking medical treatment. And this case raised ethical questions about parental rights and child protection in Canada.
Oh God. I mean, this also proves just how strong religious ideas are in the mind of true believers. In that it can make you even make your own put your own offspring in danger. Even lead you to kill them, since you believe in the ideas about the divine.
Yeah, it's like I mentioned as well, right? Like, if you consent to your own bodily harm, that's one thing. But if you're consenting to the bodily harm of someone else, that does fit into the definition of manslaughter. Um, Legally speaking, morally, you can have a debate for as many hours as you want, days, weeks, months, or whatever. But by definition and Canadian standards, if you consent to the murder of someone else, that's manslaughter. Would you say that that's an apt explanation, Ginny?
I mean, legally, since I am not, any expert of Canadian law, I can't comment on that. But morally, I can comment that I mean, manslaughter, it might be an apt description.
Because if you consent for taking a loan on someone else's sin or name, that's financial fraud. So why is it that if you consent to the harm of someone else, it's not manslaughter? Is essentially my logic.
I mean, it kind of like has to do with intent as well. If you think that, your kid is going to burn in hell forever if you do not do these things to them that might endanger them, then you might actually argue that the intent wasn't to hurt them, but to hurt them less, even if it was based upon wrongful, ideas. Because you do have kind of like intentionality does matter in, crimes. We do define the crimes differently based upon the intentions behind them or the reasons for doing them, right? Now I would want to almost discuss this with Moose because he is the legal expert who I can discuss this with.
Yeah,
But I would guess the Canadian law actually does take into consideration the motives behind an action, right?
yeah. It definitely it that's definitely a question for Moose as well because like I'm more of a finance guy. I'm not a legal guy here. The only legal experience I had was in tenancy court, but Moose would have a better understanding of that.
Because I'm pretty sure that in certain cases you might actually be able to argue that the intention wasn't actually to harm the child, even if it resulted in that, due to the actions. But if your intention was actually something very different.
But in certain cases, there would be because the doctor would explain to them that their actions would cause harm, so they know
Yes.
that harm would be caused by their decision there.
Yeah, in those cases, I would say that probably you would be more, you know, it's probably more probable that you would be sentenced for
Manslaughter.
manslaughter. But if you didn't have that contact and you just stayed away
If
and
the kid
fought,
broke his leg and then fell off his bike and prayed, and if he fell off his bike and broke his leg, and the parents were like, "Para locum luna prueba," or they're like, "Oh, praise be to Jesus or Jehovah or whatever," and hoped it healed and the kid died before he came to the hospital, I would agree. But if he's in the hospital, the surgeon,
yeah,
my
yeah.
relative,
I
explained,
meant more. I
yeah,
meant more if the kid gets sick due to a disease and they decide to not get treatment because they believe in this was God's judgment or something like that.
for sure.
Because
Yeah.
there was a discussion because I remember there was a case. I think it wasn't even in Sweden. It might be in one of our neighboring countries, in either Denmark or Norway. But there was this famous, case of there was a kid that had fallen ill, and the parents hadn't taken them to the completely free healthcare that exists in both Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, and had simply let the kid die because it was God's will that that happens. And this went into discussions about religious freedom and if it was manslaughter or not.
Yeah, it's this would probably be a discussion for Moose on the specificalities, and he wants to do an episode on this in the future, so we might bring up these certain
Yeah,
cases again. So the next one is child marriage and forced marriages. There was a child marriage in Yemen in 2021 where a 14-year-old girl was died after being married off to a much older man. Um, Forced marriages in the UK. British woman was forced by intermarriage by her family who believed it was a religious duty. The woman sought a legal protection and successfully obtained a forced marriage protection order, highlighting the challenges for that. In India, a 15-year-old girl died by suicide after being forced to marry a man twice her age. The incident shed light on the persistence of child marriage in certain communities. And then in Malaysia, there was a forced marriage as well, where the woman had to go seek woman's shelter. And I think Ayan Hirsi Ali is um, someone who was an example of that.
I remember
Anything to
something
add?
like that, but I haven't looked into her. She never really clicked with me. So I was never that interested in her content or what she has been doing, but I know who she is, but yeah. But
Yeah,
generally, when it comes to child marriages and such, this was one of those early subjects where I was one of those first times I was actually on the show. You remember that,
yeah, I do.
right? Where we got this discussion about where child marriages were most prevalent, and I think we were discussing how it's so prevalent. The Middle East is the most, and I actually said, wait a sec, isn't wasn't Ethiopia? And then we looked into Ethiopia, and they actually had a higher degree of child marriage or something.
Yeah, it's a religious thing, but it's also socio-economic
Yeah,
thing
yeah,
as well.
it's both.
Yeah.
And you do have also scandals and cases of people in the Western world trying to do child marriages because they interpret religion as demanding it. But it should also be mentioned that child marriage in the third world, especially in the very poor, in the absolute poorest countries, I also try to not be as harsh upon people doing it, because in those cases the alternative might actually be worse in some cases. And
Yeah.
it's due to very complex reasons about how marriage is viewed as kind of like ensuring the survival of the clan, and how you do have ideas about taking care of people back and forth, and it's also kind of like protection system for people as well. So
It's also a great way because like that's one way, but the mentality of the men that are marrying little children, their intent isn't for like the protection of uh their clan or whatnot. Their intention is, whippy, I get a child here.
I mean, it is also that, because kind of like many of the deals in clan societies is that you marry one member from your clan into our, we marry one from your into your, and thus we have kind of like, you could say that they are almost acting like hostages that ensure peace and continued cooperation. And the younger these people are married off, the better it is for integrating them into the clan structure. And you also have things that it ensures that the children haven't had other activities, or that the prospective wives haven't had other sexual partners before, which can create bastard children. And when bastard children are born, you usually have succession issues, you have conflicts arising from that if it is found out and such. And there are some practical reasons why child marriages are so common in very strong clan societies, in which case the state is very weak and the like, and it is actually kind of like protective also for the children and for the greater community by doing this.
Yeah.
This isn't me excusing child marriage in a situation where you do not live under these conditions, but we need to still remember that the entire world is not the first world, where people or even the second world like Eastern Europe and certain parts of Asia where you do have a pretty high standard of living. It's
Yeah,
this is a very sensitive topic to discuss. But we need to still remember that child marriage is also very much a product of a context.
yeah, definitely. So the next point I have here is isolation and indoctrination. It's basically one case was the House of Horrors, and
Wait. I forgot to mention one thing when you said you all you also thought about marrying away only the daughter, but you do also marry away young boys as well. I mean, you have had marriages where both kids are underage and have been married to each other by a third party as well.
oh, but that doesn't work in Daniel Hakikachu's eyes.
No, not him, but he is one of those cases where he lives in a context where it's inexcusable of doing these sorts of things. All right,
Yeah,
I'm never excused that kind of thing. All right, let's be
yeah,
clear about this. Those things are inexcusable. But I'm talking about if you live, for example, if you live in the
Ru- Afghanistan.
rural
We watched some of those
yeah
videos on
rural
CNN, right?
areas of Pakistan or the Middle East or something, and you do not have that kind of context I'm talking about where child marriage, you know, is no longer necessary, then it might, I I'm not saying I do this because I think that these people are stupid and they do not know better. It isn't about knowing better. It's about another context where you actually act differently because it is not that bad in that context because the alternatives might be even worse due to various reasons.
Alternative might be starvation and death.
Yeah, yes. Or it might be clan conflicts due to clan politics. Or it might be, not getting married at all and thus getting exposed later in life to various dangers and insecurity. Or it
Yeah,
might be repaying debts to other families that have helped you. A tit for
yeah,
tat.
all those
Again, clan
exist and
politics.
such, right? So it's, but I think Moose would like doing an episode on that in the future, more in depth. But we also have so we only have around 6 slides left, so I think we can complete this
Sure.
presentation as well.
Sorry,
No
I just
worries. No
got
worries. This
aside.
discussion is what gin and tonic is for, right? So,
Yeah,
yeah.
but I kind of I sometimes go off the rails.
If I didn't like it, I would have interrupted sooner.
Yeah,
But so isolation and indoctrination. So there was a case with the House of Horrors, a California couple citing religious beliefs, isolated and abused their 13 children inside their home. The children were deprived of educational and medical care, facing severe neglect and emotional. Um, the case shocked the nation and highlighting the dangers of religious extremism when taken to the extreme. And they had the 12 tribes community in Germany. German authorities raided 12 tribes community, a religious sect, due to the allegations of child abuse and mistreatment. Children were found subject to corporal punishment and hard discipline. Then they had the exclusive Presbyterian community in Australia, and they also isolated their children from society, limiting their interactions with non-members and controlling access to information, basically running North Korea. Yeah, so do you know of any cases like this that happen more?
I mean, you do have similar cases with certain sects all in Sweden from frikyrkor, which are independent churches that have done similar to this. I also know that a lot, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses also practice exclusion or banishment. A total reaction of you when you say something that makes you break with the church, or whatever they call their organization.
Yeah. Yeah, so isolation it's special because it's not just religious things, but religion plays a huge front in it as well.
Yeah, you have political groups that do this as well. Those that have been active in various extreme environments of left-wing groups do know that there exists some of those groups that are kind of sect-like in their structures.
Yeah.
Oh yes, terrorism and extremism.
So, on Easter Sunday, multiple suicide bombings targeted churches and hotels in Sri Lanka, killing more than 250 people. These attacks were carried out by local extremist groups affiliated with ISIS. They were a franchisee. They're a multinational corporation like McDonald's. Then there was a case with the Paris attacks. In a series of coordinated attacks in Paris, gunmen and suicide bombers targeted a concert hall, soccer stadium, restaurants, and a cafe, killing 130 people, injuring hundreds more. ISIS claimed responsibility for those attacks, demonstrating the group's ability to orchestrate large-scale acts of terror in Western countries. Manchester Arena bombing in 2017. Suicide bomber targeted the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester, killing 22 people, including children, and injuring many others. The attacker had extremist links and associated with ISIS, illustrating vulnerability of soft targets to terrorism. Wow. But we don't talk just about Islam here. We also talk about other religions and other cultures. So far right extremism carried out it's more of a cult-based thing, but they carried out mass shootings in Hanau, Germany, targeting two shisha bars. The attacks resulted in deaths of 9 people, most of whom were immigrant backgrounds. The shooter left behind a racist manifesto, highlighting the threat of xenophobia and anti-immigrant theologies. The Christchurch Mosque in New Zealand had its massacre in 2019, and it was a far-right extremist who attacked 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, live streaming the massacre onto social media. The shooter killed 51 worshippers and injuring many other, expressing white supremacist and anti-immigrant beliefs. And then the El Paso shooting, where again a right-wing extremist went and shot 23 people and injured dozens. But yeah, so to the last couple of points, Jenny, what is your opinion before we shift into the last topic there?
I mean, even if it is the case that, we usually discuss Islamic terrorism a lot on this channel due to, the nature of this channel, it should be, clear that Islamic extremism is not the only extremism that causes terrorism. There are a lot of other groups that are violent too, and have no compulsion, no nothing hindering them from doing the same sort of terror as we see with Islamic groups.
Yeah. You have so one thing that I like including is the Khalistani extremism, because I was in that area at that parking lot when this happened, and I was nearly attacked where there was stabbings by Khalistani extremisms during a car meet. So I'm a huge car enthusiast in my own personal time. I love like fixing up used cars, and I wouldn't say racing, but taking them to car meets to show off again with other technicians. And during one of these events in Brampton, there was a Khalistani riot there, and 20 people got stabbed. And I was
Oh,
at one of these car meets during this time.
yeah. What wasn't also Khalistani separatism were linked with the individuals that were targeted by that Indian conspiracy to kill people in Canada and the United States
Yeah,
recently?
they were.
Yeah. So now the Indian government have tried to, or some sort of section within the Indian government might have organized assassination squads in the Americas to kill people connected to Khalistani separatism.
Yeah, like I understand that if he's high, like because I understand the hypocrisy, because if he's a terrorist for America and he goes hides in Pakistan, the CIA goes and assassinates him inside Pakistan. So if
Yeah,
America does it, it's all good
but
and patriotic. But if
that's
India does
but
it,
it's
it's
still
wrong.
kind of
But
what
then,
about it's
so
still kind of
so the point I was making is that India claims this, but that's the what I was going to say, that is what about and both people are in the wrong at that point. You don't
yes.
kill another country's national. So I was trying to like steelman their point and see what exactly would they be saying.
I mean, what was most scary was in one of those cases, it wasn't even that he was connected to any sort of terrorism. It was just he argued for a cause that is leads to terrorism. Yeah, but that's not the same thing as organizing terrorism. So yeah, this mess is probably going to take years to resolve, but I'm looking at it right now with interest due to various reasons. It's also speaking about terrorism and extremism. I actually a couple of months ago when these murder attempts were brought up, I actually had a professor on one of the universities where I was kind of like studying actually speak in favor of doing these assassinations because it was anti-colonial action, because these having these extremists allowed to speak in, for example, Canada and the United States undermines the stability of India, and India is thus allowed to defend themselves against this colonist attack on them, which just made me face palm inwardly. I didn't do it outwardly. I just kept, silent and just nodded along because you don't want to raise your voice in these matters. But still, the issue is that you do have people that actually aren't directly a part of this, but still cheer it on due to various reasons as third parties. And that is even to go into the issues of people, for example, political movements being supported by third parties due to various political interests. For example, various extremist groups in Africa and also, for example, the Assad regime in Syria being funded by Russia. So you do have various third parties that are interested in these groups and these sorts of extremism as well that aren't directly of these groups.
Yeah, that so I think like with the Khalistani stuff as well, if even if you speak about it, you're considered a terrorist in India now, and they've lost the concept of free speech. But yeah, if you actually support a terrorist organization, I think you're the worst person in hell. But do I think that because like a criminal lawyer will advocate for an actual criminal, but does that make the criminal lawyer a bad person? He's doing his job. There's other metrics that you would use to determine whether he's a good or bad person. Um, Not what he's advocating for in that moment. It's his job to advocate for certain things. So the next one is human trafficking. And when I say human trafficking, it's not that I like human trafficking, but it's one of my favorite ones to study just because of the technicalities behind it. They make great stories to write down for journalism, and there's a lot of stuff to unwind in them. So human trafficking basically being modern day slavery. Would you think that that's an apt definition of it, Culture Gene?
Yes.
This Church of Scientology fit that definition when one of its former members, Claire Headley, filed a lawsuit accusing the church of forced labor and human rights violations. And she claimed she was forced to work long hours for little pay and was subjected to harsh conditions. The Sisters of Good Shepherd in Ireland operate, and they had women and girls who were often unmarried mothers or those considered trouble, were subjected to forced labor and harsh conditions between the 18th and 20th century. And then the survivor stories came into light in the late 20th century, highlighting the church's involvement in forced labor. This is similar to the Devadasis in Bengal. And then the sale of babies by Catholic nuns in Spain during the 20th century, where many Catholic nuns were involved in trafficking babies. Unwed mothers were pressured into giving their babies, and then these infants were sold to adoptive families. And then investigations years later revealed that there was a huge trafficking network for this. And this is the reason why I left ISKCON as well. There was a lot of religious-based human trafficking and forced labor in the organization, and I kind of like fled that stuff too. Um, Even though I still agree with a lot of the philosophies that they mentioned, but like like legally speaking, it's not like the best environment. And more cases with the Catholic Church in Australia, the Christian sects in Brazil, and then Catholic Church in Mexico, all trafficking humans, with the one in Mexico also trading organs directly with the priests there.
I mean, to be honest here, it's less the church doing this and more like individuals within the church again doing this.
Yeah. So that's it for my presentation. Any closing words, Culture Jenny, on this topic?
Yeah, where you have faith and strong authority together with very little structures of responsibility, you will get abuse. And these abuses will often take the form in illegal activities. Because humans are going to be humans at the end of the day, and they are going to abuse things for their own gain.
So what you're saying is humans are going to be scumbags no matter what, whether it's for
Yes,
God or for their own personal greed.
yes. And religion is just an excuse and a convenient shield to use to defend yourself while you are doing these sort of heinous acts.
Now, what would you say to directly?
Do I will say also that there are people that actually are genuinely nice and good people that also do heinous stuff due to believing in religion, due to thinking that the cause is just, and thus doing extremism and other sorts of acts related to the religion that are bad. So that happens too. But those are separate groups, I would say.
Definitely. But in this case, I think my closing words are they're very similar to Jenny. Uh, If your religion directly tells you to hate someone or cause harm to someone, then it's probably bullshit. And if it doesn't tell you, then don't do it. It would be my closing statement there. But I'll be in Discord in around 5 minutes for those who want to have a deeper discussion on this as well. Thank you so much for joining me, Culture Jenny.
It was my pleasure. See you later.
See you in Discord.